Do we have some information on who Stephen Ross and the Miami Dolphins could be targeting in the offseason in their GM search? Because The Athletic actually put out an article of GM candidates and who could be hired by the Dolphins. There are a lot of names. We'll comb through them. But one thing is abundantly clear to me is that the interim GM, Champ Kelly, can't become the full-time GM when the hiring is official in January. I'm sorry, I just don't think Champ Kelly has done a good job in the 1 week he's been the GM of this team. I think Miami could have been a lot more aggressive at the trade deadline, only did one deal, sending Jalen Phillips to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I just think that they could have and should have been more aggressive trading players away like Minkah Fitzpatrick, like Rasul Douglas, maybe a Jalen Wright. Ultimately, all of those guys stayed put. Now, maybe it wasn't just Champ Kelly. Mike McDaniel said in a presser earlier this week that him, Kelly, and Brandon Shore were in contact with ownership, collaborating on who should be traded, who shouldn't be traded, the value the Dolphins should be getting in return on some of these players. Like, listen, we talked about it throughout the week. I didn't want to trade Jalen Waddle, but if you got offered a first and like a second round pick, I think you have to consider it. I didn't want to trade Devon Achane. You get offered a first-round pick. I think you have to do it. But with veterans that are not long for this team, you would have probably liked to move off of them. Like, I get it. A lot of people are saying the value wasn't there for some of the Dolphins players. Like, the Dolphins weren't being offered good enough draft compensation. But I still will go out on the record and say not trading Minkah Fitzpatrick was a mistake. I understand Bradley Chubb because of the financial implications of it long term, and you probably were only going to get like a 6th-round pick, maybe a 5th-round pick back, which isn't worth the financial troubles. But Minkah Fitzpatrick would not have cost you a ton in the future because he doesn't have any guaranteed salary next year. He's not going to be here next season. He doesn't even want to be here now. I just think not capitalizing on getting a pick in return for Minkah Fitzpatrick at the deadline was a little bit of a mistake. That's just my thoughts on the matter. But let's get to the Athletics GM candidates now because there were some interesting names that they were thrown out there. And the number one name that really caught my eye that I wanted to talk about was Alec Halaby, the assistant GM for the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a really up-and-coming GM, and you tell by the picture, he's a relatively young guy, only 39 years old, and the athletic writer Jourdan Rodrigue said very positive things about Halaby. The longtime right-handed general manager of Howie Roseman, Harvard graduate, worked his way up from an entry-level role in football operations with the Eagles in 2007, leading multiple areas within the organization, including talent identification and player evaluation, roster and resource management, and overall organizational strategy. Halaby was a finalist for the Jets GM vacancy last offseason. And he is certainly a really intriguing name because he comes up from the Eagles, who have obviously been one of the most well-run organizations in the National Football League over the last 5 years. He's learning underneath many consider the best GM in all of football in Howie Roseman. And the way that the Eagles are able to build their football team, they invested in the trenches, O-line, D-line, made opportunistic trades for guys like A.J. Brown, Darius Slay back in the day. And it helped lead them to become Super Bowl champions just a year ago. So that entire thought process, the entire way that the Eagles organization goes about things is something that I would really like to be in Miami. And it would be a little bit of a swing, but it's a swing that I'm willing to take. And make sure you spread the word to other Dolphins fans. Let's inform more people on the Dolphins GM search and who could be in line to take the full-time GM job in January. So help us out, share today's video. I briefly mentioned it a second ago, but I do think Halaby would be a swing. Like, there's more candidates out there that are more like concrete, like in almost guaranteed. I would say guaranteed successes, but more likely. I mean, with Halaby, you're going really young. You're going analytical. You're going new age thinking, where there's other guys out there that have been across the league for a very long time and seen it. And yeah, Halaby's been working since 2007, but he is still really young. Like I mentioned, he's 39. So think about this. He got in that organization in 07. He's 39 now. That's what, 16 years ago. That's about 23 years of old age. It is crazy to think that. So be a swing, but it's a swing that I would be willing to take, and he certainly should be getting an interview with the Miami Dolphins. Now, this list from The Athletic had a ton of different candidates. We are not going to talk about these five. These five, Ray Agnew, Ed Dodds, Chad Alexander, Josh Williams, and Ian Cunningham, were all on the Athletics list. I'm not talking about these five because we did break down all five of these guys in depth on this video on the channel just about a week ago. Dolphins GM candidates after Chris Grier was fired. So if you want, go back and watch this video. That's the thumbnail, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. But out of those five names that we just showed and talked more in depth on that video, I want to re-emphasize Josh Williams, the director of player personnel and scouting for the San Francisco 49ers. I've been told and heard rumblings that Josh Williams is a really strong connection between Stephen Ross, the Miami Dolphins. So I do believe that is a name to keep your eye out on. Moving on here, number 2 on the list that The Athletic named, Ryan Cowden, the current vice president of player personnel for the veteran New England Patriots. And that is him next to Mike Vrabel. Those two work hand in hand. They worked like that in Tennessee. They're working like that in New England right now. Rodrigue on Cowden said he served as an interim general manager in Tennessee while undergoing multiple GM interviews over the last 8 seasons, has an extensive scouting background and personnel executive background with the Panthers, Titans, and Giants. Cowden, Elliott Wolf, and head coach Mike Vrabel have rebuilt the flailing Patriots into a 7-2 team in less than 1 season together. I like Cowden. He's an interesting name because I like the way him and Vrabel have worked together. I just don't see him as an option for the Dolphins, if we're going to be honest. Why do I say that? It's because he has such a strong working relationship with Mike Vrabel. I don't see them breaking up. And right now, the current GM for the Patriots, if you will, is Elliott Wolf. I have a strong belief and knowledge that it feels like he might be pushed out the door this offseason because he wasn't in line with Vrabel, Ryan Cowden. So personally, I think they're actually going to move on from Elliott Wolf this offseason or demote him back to scouting, if you will, and promote Ryan Cowden to GM of the Patriots. So, yeah, this is a name to monitor. I just don't see it as one that Miami is ultimately going to do. More coming up here in a second, but this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The weather is changing, but you know what never changes? The feeling of being right on Prize Picks. So keep the season rolling with Prize Picks. So simple to play. Just pick more or less than at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Prize Picks is the only app that offers stacks, meaning you could pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. Want to pick more or less on Josh Allen's passing yards this week, rushing yards, touchdowns. Now you can pick all of them in the same lineup, only on Prize Picks. I'm only going to have one Josh Allen stat projection in my lineup this week. That's less on his completions because I think they run the ball a ton. Also going more than Devon Achane receiving yards and more than Tua Tagovailoa pass attempts. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Another name to keep an eye on, Nolan Teasley, the Seattle Seahawks assistant GM. He is a very young fella, just like Alec Halaby. And is it just me? Does he not look like Elon Musk? That's just me. Cooper Grace. But Jourdan on Teasley, one of John Schneider's top deputies who worked his way up from his arrival to the team in 2013 as a scouting intern. Teasley has executive-level experience in pro and college scouting and pro personnel roles at one of the more technologically advanced teams in the league. And I don't dispute anything Rodrigue says there on Teasley. It just feels a little bit early for him. I mentioned it. He just got into the league at 2013, so he's only been in the NFL for 12 years. I think he could be a solid option in the NFL as a potential GM in the future. I just feel like Miami, if they're going to go a young, analytical GM kind of route, I think the first person we talked about today, Alec Halaby from the Eagles, makes a little bit more sense in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe they interview Teasley and he just absolutely blows them out of the water. That's a possibility as well. Like, I expect Miami to have a very extensive interview search. Like, they should be interviewing 10, 11, 12 candidates for their position because they are a team that desperately needs to hire the right GM. And I want to know who you think the right GM is. Who do you want to be the next GM of the Dolphins? Is it one of the people we're highlighting on today's show? Is it one of the 5 names we talked about on the video a week ago and briefly mentioned today? Who is your guy? The fourth guy we're going to talk about today, Mike Greenberg, the current Tampa Bay Buccaneers assistant GM. A name that I honestly don't think we've been talking a lot about and enough about as a potential GM replacement because he's done excellent work across the NFL and specifically has a large hand in rebuilding the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the last decade after the Jameis Winston era went a little sideways. Greenberg, who has been with the team since 2010, has assisted GM Jason Light on all things during multiple team building pivots. And I think that's the most important part here. They went from having the number 1 pick, Jameis Winston, that didn't end up working out, to bringing in Tom Brady, building a winning veteran roster around him, getting a Super Bowl title, and then they find his replacement in Baker Mayfield and are among one of the more consistent, competitive, contending teams in the NFC over the last 5 years. I think Mike Greenberg would be a very solid option for the Miami Dolphins. It's another team in Tampa Bay that prioritizes building through the trenches. And I think if you're sensing a theme here from me personally, I really do want to go with a GM that comes from an organization that prioritizes offensive line and defensive line because that's how the elite teams stay elite, by having above average O-lines and D-lines. The Eagles, the Buccaneers, the Rams, all examples. The Lions, the Chargers, that's how those teams have been successful over the last decade. Having a top-notch O-line and having a top-notch D-line that can get after the quarterback. Because if we're going to be honest, having the right quarterback is the number 1 important thing in the NFL. You know what number 2 is? Protecting the quarterback and getting after the quarterback. It's all about the QB. And the trenches are a large part of it. Other names I want you guys to monitor for the position that were listed in that article but didn't want to break them down in depth today. John McKay, the current assistant GM for the Los Angeles Rams. Another name that I really like. And then here are a couple other weird ones. Mike Bradway, the current Chiefs assistant GM. I don't really feel too hot about him because I actually don't really love what the Chiefs have been doing in that front office as of late. They got Mahomes and he's masqueraded a lot of issues that they've had. So kind of a little lukewarm on that. But Adam Berry, the Eagles VP of football operations and strategy, is certainly another name to mention. It's pretty interesting to see. Point I'm trying to make is between the 5, 6 names we talked about today, then the other 5 names on the video we talked about last week, Miami is going to have a lot of good options. They should interview all 10, 11 names that we talked about over the past couple of weeks and then bring them in for second interviews, third interviews, get more in depth, get to know the people, and make the right decision. And if they make the right decision, Miami is going to be in a good place because if you have a right and good GM, good head coach, you'll be able to find successful players to fit your organization in the future. We'll be here every step of the way as well. So make sure you subscribe. Join the Dolphins Today family for daily content.